The concrete walls of the Dragon Tower's private garage were so cold and gray they seemed to swallow the light, feeling as heavy and suffocating as the fear in my throat. My fingers scraped against the rough surface of the pillar I was pressed against, the grit under my nails stinging, a small, sharp pain I clung to so I wouldn't scream. I focused on that sting, desperate to drown out the sound of my own frantic breathing. For 6 months, I had been a ghost, working double shifts at the diner under a fake name, always keeping my head down, always moving. Tonight, the side exit had been jammed by a delivery truck, forcing me out the front and straight into the path of the one person I had spent half a year dying to forget. Of course, because the universe wasn't finished breaking me until Marcus saw me. The parking garage stretched before me like a dark, echoing tomb, all oil-stained floors and fluorescent lights that flickered with a rhythmic, taunting click. The air smelled of expensive exhaust and damp earth. My worn sneakers felt like sirens on the pavement, marking me as an intruder in a world of luxury and steel. I kept my back to the wall, counting the pillars, 10 more to the restricted exit. Then I could disappear into the city, lose myself in the subway crowds, and retreat back to my tiny, locked apartment. 10 pillars, I could survive that. Nyla. The voice hit me like a physical blow. That low, familiar drawl that used to mean home, but now only meant a bruise. I didn't turn around. If I kept moving, maybe the shadows would finally do their job and take me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My feet were heavy, rooted to the oil-stained concrete as the echo of Marcus's voice bounced off the low ceiling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my muscles had locked into a state of paralysis. "I know you hear me, Nyla," he said, his footsteps slow and deliberate, savoring the hunt. "Did you really think a restricted garage would keep me out? You always were bad at hiding." The sound of his approach was suddenly drowned out by a low, mechanical growl. From the far end of the ramp, a wall of white lead light sliced through the gloom. A motorcade of 4 obsidian-black SUVs swept into the private level, their tires hissing against the pavement with a rhythmic authority that silenced the space. Marcus stopped. I pressed my spine harder against the pillar, the cold stone biting through my thin shirt. The lead vehicle didn't just park, it claimed the center of the floor, cutting off the path between Marcus and me. The engine cut out, leaving a silence so heavy it felt pressurized. Then, the rear door opened. Joon-Seok Kang stepped out. He didn't look like a man arriving home. He looked like a king reclaiming a throne. His black suit was a sharp, lethal silhouette against the industrial gray of the garage. He didn't rush. He didn't look around in confusion. He simply stood there, adjusting the cuff of his dark shirt, his presence radiating a disciplined, terrifying calm. His eyes, cold and steady, found me first. He took in the dust on my jeans, the way my fingers were white-knuckled against the pillar, and the raw terror written across my face. Then, his gaze shifted to Marcus. The shift in the air was instantaneous. Marcus, who had spent months making me feel small, suddenly looked like a child caught playing with fire. He tried to puff out his chest, his hand twitching toward his pocket, but the sheer weight of Joon-Seok's stare pinned him to the spot. Joon-Seok didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply walked forward, his stride measured and dominant, closing the distance until he stood directly in front of me, his back to Marcus, an act of utter disdain, treating the threat behind him as if it didn't exist. The scent of sandalwood and expensive steel replaced the smell of exhaust. Joon-Seok reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder before he draped his heavy, silk-lined blazer over me. The warmth of the fabric was shocking. "Go to the elevator, Nyla," he said, his voice a low, smooth velvet that brooked no argument. "Hey, she's with me," Marcus barked, his voice cracking. Joon-Seok finally turned his head. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just looked at Marcus with a flat, unreadable expression that promised a very specific kind of ending. Marcus took a half-step back, his bravado evaporating into the shadows. In that silence, I realized the truth. I had run from a monster, only to be claimed by the man who owned the dark. The elevator ride was a silent, vertical ascent into a world I hadn't known existed. The interior was lined with brushed gold and mirrors that forced me to look at myself. a frantic, soot-streaked girl wrapped in a blazer that cost more than a year of my rent. Beside me, Joon-Seok Kang stood like a statue, his gaze fixed on the digital floor numbers climbing toward the sky. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer platitudes. His silence was a shield, thick and impenetrable. When the doors slid open, they didn't reveal a hallway, but the interior of the penthouse itself. The transition was jarring. My sneakers, still damp from the garage, touched hand-knotted silk rugs that dampened every sound. The air here was different, thinner, colder, smelling of expensive sandalwood and the sharp metallic tang of high-end security systems. "You'll stay here," Joon-Seok said, finally breaking the silence as he moved toward a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the city. The lights of the metropolis twinkled below like fallen stars, making the height feel dizzying. "My staff will provide whatever you need. You are not to leave the floor without my express permission." I clutched his blazer tighter around my chest, the warmth of it starting to fade into a chill of realization. "Why?" I whispered, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the room. "Why help me?" He turned then, the city lights silhouetting his sharp profile. He looked at me with a detached, clinical interest, as if I were a piece of art he had just acquired. "Because Marcus is a symptom of a larger disease, Nyla, and because I find that I dislike people who think they can hunt in my territory." As he spoke, a man in a dark suit, similar to the ones from the motorcade, stepped out of the shadows of the kitchen, whispering something in Korean into a headset. On a mahogany side table, a sleek tablet flickered to life, showing a dozen different camera angles of the building. One of them caught a glimpse of Marcus, still standing in the garage below, looking small and impotent, surrounded by Joon-Seok's security team. The relief I expected to feel was replaced by a new, sharper kind of dread. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. And while the locks were designed to keep Marcus out, I realized with a sinking heart that they were just as effective at keeping me in. I had traded a predator who wanted to break me for a king who expected to own me. "Is this a prison?" I asked, my gaze meeting his. Joon-Seok tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, one that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "It is a sanctuary, Nyla, but in my world, safety always comes with a price." The silence of the penthouse was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the city's life far below. Joon-Seok didn't move from the window for a long time. He simply stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a silhouette of absolute control. When he finally turned, he didn't look like a savior. He looked like a strategist about to move a vital piece across a board. "I don't believe in charity, Nyla," he began, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "And I suspect you've learned the hard way that nothing in this world is truly free. You want Marcus gone. You want to stop looking over your shoulder every time a car slows down on the street." I felt the weight of his blazer still draped over my shoulders, an expensive anchor. "I want my life back," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can give you more than your life. I can give you a fortress." He walked toward a mahogany desk, picking up a heavy fountain pen but not using it. "But in return, I need something only you can provide. A face, a presence, a distraction." He explained the situation with a cold, clinical precision. His position within the Kang syndicate was being challenged by a faction of traditionalists, men who viewed his lack of an heir or a stable partner as a sign of transience, a weakness they could exploit. They wanted a family man they could predict, not a lone wolf they feared. "I need a fiancé," he stated, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Someone who doesn't belong to the other families. Someone I can mold, who owes their very breath to my protection. You will play the role of the woman who captured the heart of Joon-Seok Kang. You will attend the galas, sit by my side at the dinners, and live under this roof." "A lie," I whispered. "You want me to lie to the most dangerous men in the city." "I want you to survive," he corrected. "The moment you wear my ring, Marcus becomes a ghost. If he touches you, he is not just harassing an ex-girlfriend, he is declaring war on me. He wouldn't survive the hour." He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the faint, intoxicating scent of sandalwood. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw where the tension was held tightest. The contract is simple. I provide the armor, you provide the image. For 1 year, you are mine in the eyes of the world. After that, I will give you a new identity, enough money to never work again, and the freedom you've been running for. I looked around the gilded cage of the penthouse. The locks were high-tech, the glass was reinforced, and the man standing before me was a mystery wrapped in a silk suit. It was a deal with a devil, but he was a devil who offered a shield instead of a fist. And if I say no, I asked. Joon-Seok dropped his hand, his expression returning to that unreadable, polished mask. Then I will have my driver take you back to the street, and we will see if Marcus is still waiting in the dark. The choice wasn't a choice at all. I reached out and took the pen from the desk. The transformation began not with a conversation, but with a silent invasion of my space. By dawn, the worn jeans and the soot-stained shirt I had fled in were gone, replaced by a row of garment bags that hummed with the quiet arrogance of wealth. A team of 3 women arrived before the sun had fully cleared the skyline, moving with a clinical, synchronized efficiency that left no room for protest. I was scrubbed, polished, and painted until the girl who had hidden behind a concrete pillar was buried under layers of luxury. They draped me in midnight blue silk that felt like cool water against my skin, the fabric so heavy and fine it seemed to possess its own heartbeat. Around my neck, they fastened a diamond choker, a shimmering band of ice that felt less like jewelry and more like a high-tech collar. When Joon-Seok entered the dressing suite, the stylists vanished into the shadows of the penthouse as if they had never existed. He stood in the doorway, his eyes traveling over me with the same slow, calculating intensity he used to survey the city. He didn't offer a compliment. To him, this wasn't about beauty. It was about the calibration of a weapon. "The silk suits you," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. "But you're still wearing your fear like a second skin. Relax your shoulders, Nyla. A woman of your supposed status doesn't carry the weight of the world. She lets the world carry her." He stepped closer, reaching into his vest pocket to produce a ring. It was a massive, emerald-cut diamond flanked by baguettes, so bright it seemed to draw all the light in the room toward my hand. As he slid it onto my finger, the weight of the stone felt immense, a physical anchor tying me to his world. "This is your armor," he whispered, his fingers lingering on mine. His touch was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold gems. "To the men we are meeting tonight, this ring means you are untouchable. It means that to harm you is to invite my shadow into their homes." I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I looked regal, untouchable, and breathtakingly expensive. But as I touched the silk on my hip, I felt a shiver of dread. I wasn't just Nyla Carter anymore, I was a marked woman. The dusty girl from the garage had been invisible to the world, but this version of me, Joon-Seok Kang's fiancé, was a target illuminated in neon. "I don't feel safe," I admitted, my voice trembling as I met his gaze in the glass. "I feel like bait." Joon-Seok stepped behind me, placing his hands firmly on my shoulders. His grip was steadying, yet possessive. "In my world, Nyla, there is no such thing as safety. There is only power and those who are clever enough to hide behind it. Tonight, you start learning how to hide in plain sight." The grand jade ballroom felt less like a dining hall and more like a battlefield paved in gold. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, aged whiskey, and the sharp, invisible tang of suppressed hostility. As Joon-Seok led me into the room, his hand rested firmly on the small of my back, a gesture that was both a support and a claim. Every head turned. The clink of silverware died an unnatural death, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that made the diamond choker around my neck feel like it was tightening. The men seated at the long, lacquered table were a gallery of shadows in silk suits. Their faces were etched with the kind of hardness that only decades of violence could carve. At the head of the table sat Elder Park, a man whose skin looked like yellowed parchment and whose eyes held the cold, calculating stillness of a viper. "So," Elder Park rasped, his voice a dry whisper that carried easily through the silent room, "this is the woman who has tamed the dragon of soul. She looks delicate, a glass doll found in a gutter." I felt the blood rush to my face, the old urge to shrink, to apologize, to vanish, clawing at my throat. I could feel Marcus's ghost whispering in my ear, telling me I was nothing. But then I felt the steady, unwavering heat of Joon-Seok's hand against my spine. He didn't speak. He was waiting for me. I took a breath, letting the weight of the massive diamond on my finger ground me. I didn't look at the floor. I looked directly into Elder Park's eyes, mirroring the coldness I had seen in Joon-Seok. "A glass doll can be broken, it's true," I said, my voice cutting through the tension with a clarity that surprised even me. "But glass can also be ground into dust and blown into the eyes of those who underestimate it. I am not here because I am delicate, Elder Park. I am here because Joon-Seok Kang does not settle for anything less than what he requires." A ripple of low murmurs broke out among the associates. Joon-Seok's fingers flexed slightly against my back, a subtle, hidden approval. "A bold tongue," Park mused, a ghost of a smile twitching his thin lips. "Let us see if your stomach is as strong as your words. Sit." The dinner was a grueling interrogation disguised as a meal. They watched how I held my glass, how I navigated the intricate politics of their conversation, and how I stood my ground when the questions turned into verbal traps. Every time I felt myself faltering, I glanced at Joon-Seok. He remained a statue of calm, but his presence was an anchor. I realized then that I wasn't just proving I belonged to him, I was proving that I could survive the world he lived in. By the time the coffee was served, the predatory glares had shifted into a wary, grudging respect. I had passed the first test, but as I looked at the dark windows reflecting the ballroom, I knew the real war was only just beginning. The adrenaline from the dinner hadn't faded. It had simply curdled into a restless ache. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the wind whipping my silk skirt around my legs, looking out at a city that felt like a sea of predatory lights. The diamond on my finger felt like a lead weight. "The air is better up here," a voice said, low and steady. I didn't turn. I knew the sound of his footsteps now, too light for a man of his build, too purposeful to be anything but dangerous. Joon-Seok stepped up to the railing, shedding his suit jacket. For the first time, I saw him with his sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint, jagged scars that traced his forearms like a map of a forgotten war. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. "Most people crumble under Park's gaze. They see the elder, the history, the blood. You just saw a man." "I saw a bully," I replied, finally looking at him. "I've had a lifetime of practice looking at those. But why me, Joon-Seok? There are 1,000 women in this city who would kill for this contract. Women who know how to walk, how to speak, who wouldn't need to be taught how to hide their fear." Joon-Seok leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on a distant point on the horizon. The polished mask he wore for the world didn't slip, but it softened, the edges of his mouth tightening with a memory I couldn't see. 20 years ago, I was standing in a rain-slicked alleyway not far from the garage where I found you," he said softly. "I was hiding from men who wanted to finish what they had started with my father. I was small, I was terrified, and I was entirely alone. I spent 3 days behind a dumpster, breathing in the smell of rot and old iron, waiting for the end." He turned to look at me, and for a fleeting second, the mafia boss was gone. In his eyes was the ghost of that boy in the alley. "Everyone else looks at the Dragon Tower and sees a throne," he continued. "They see the power, but when I saw you pressed against that pillar, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor who was still fighting even when the odds were 0. I chose you because you have the one thing wealth can't buy and the syndicate can't beat, the will to stay alive when everything is trying to bury you. I didn't need a socialite, Nyla. I needed someone who knew what it felt like to be hunted, because only those people know how to truly fight back." The silence that followed was different than the ones before. It wasn't the silence of a cage, but of a bridge being built. In that quiet moment, high above the world, the armor between us finally began to crack. I realized then that we weren't just a boss and a baker. We were 2 people who had both learned how to turn our scars into steel. The piece of the balcony was a fragile thing, shattered the following morning by the sharp, insistent chime of a security alert. I found Joon-Seok in the command center, a room tucked behind his office that hummed with the electric glow of a dozen monitors. The air here was frigid, stripped of the penthouse's warmth. "Look," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. He tapped a glass screen, enlarging a grainy feed from the Dragon Tower's perimeter. My heart performed a sickening roll in my chest. There, standing across the street, was Marcus. He wasn't the disheveled, frantic man I had seen in the garage. He was wearing a fresh leather jacket, his posture arrogant, leaning against a silver sedan. But it wasn't just him. Two men stood behind him, heavy-set, with the unmistakable silhouette of weapons concealed under their coats. "He's still here," I whispered, the old terror clawing at my throat. "How? You said he wouldn't survive the hour if he stayed." Joon-Seok zoomed in on the car's license plate, then shifted the camera to catch the insignia on the men's lapels. A small, crimson hawk. "He's found a patron," Joon-Seok murmured, his jaw tightening. "That is the mark of Victor Kossoff. Marcus didn't just stay in the city, he went to the one man who hates me enough to weaponize a jilted ex-boyfriend." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't just a stalker anymore. He was a pawn in a much larger, more lethal game. By seeking out Kossoff, he had turned my past into a strategic weakness for Joon-Seok. My presence in this penthouse, intended to be a shield, had become a target. "Kossoff is using him to test my borders," Joon-Seok continued, his eyes never leaving the screen. "He knows I've claimed you. By keeping Marcus on a leash just outside my doors, he's daring me to step out of line. He wants a war, Nyla, and he's using your fear as the spark." I looked at the screen, at Marcus's smug face as he stared directly into the camera lens, as if he could see me shivering behind the glass. He knew I was watching. He wanted me to know that no matter how high I climbed, no matter how many diamonds I wore, he was still the shadow waiting at the bottom of the mountain. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Joon-Seok turned to me, his expression reverting to that of the apex predator. The softness from the balcony was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. "We don't react, not yet. Kossoff expects me to send a hit squad for a nobody like Marcus. He wants the escalation." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to tilt my chin toward him. "But he forgets one thing. You are no longer the girl he can scare. You are mine, and I don't lose what is mine." Despite his words, I saw the flickering movement of a dozen security teams on the other monitors, deploying to every exit. The ghost had returned, and this time he had brought an army with him. The tension that had been simmering for days finally boiled over during a transit that should have been routine. I was being moved from the Dragon Tower to a secure secondary location, a fortified estate on the outskirts of the city. Joon-Seok had stayed behind to handle an emergency with the syndicate elders, leaving me in the care of his most trusted security detail. We were 3 blocks away from the tower when the world exploded in a screech of tires and the shattering of glass. A black sedan rammed our lead vehicle, and suddenly the street was a chaotic maze of smoke and gunfire. "Stay down, stay in the car," my lead guard, Han, shouted over the roar of an engine. But the back door was wrenched open before he could lock it. I saw the flash of a familiar leather jacket and a face that had haunted my nightmares. Marcus. He looked manic, his eyes wide and bloodshot, backed by 3 of Kossoff's men. "I told you I'd find you, Nyla," he screamed, reaching for my arm. "You think you're a queen now? You're coming with me." Han lunged forward, putting his body between us, taking the brunt of Marcus's frantic strikes. The sounds of the struggle were visceral, the thud of fists, the grunts of pain, and the distant, rhythmic pop of high-caliber rounds from the other guards engaging Kossoff's shooters. In the chaos, I saw a gap. The driver's side door was hanging open, and the alleyway adjacent to the street was shrouded in shadows. For a heartbeat, the old Nyla, the one who survived by vanishing, took over. I could run. I could dive into those shadows, shed the silk and the diamonds, and try to disappear into the city's concrete veins once more. Joon-Seok's world was burning, and it was taking me with it. I looked at Han, who was bleeding from a cut over his eye, fighting like a man possessed to keep Marcus from touching me. He wasn't just doing a job, he was standing his ground because Joon-Seok had commanded it. If I ran, I was returning to a life of being hunted. If I stayed, I was stepping into a war. "Nyla, please," Marcus yelled, his hand finally snagging the fabric of my sleeve. "He's a monster. He'll kill you when he's bored of you." I looked at the hand that had once bruised me, and then at the dark, silent weapon Han had dropped during the scuffle. The choice crystallized in an instant. I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I didn't want to be a ghost. I didn't run for the alley. Instead, I reached out and grabbed the heavy, cold steel of Han's discarded firearm, leveling it at Marcus with hands that finally stopped trembling. "He's not the monster, Marcus," I said, my voice as cold as the penthouse glass. "You are." I didn't pull the trigger, but the look in my eyes was enough to make him hesitate. That second of doubt was all Han needed to throw a decisive blow that sent Marcus sprawling into the pavement. I stayed in the car, my heart hammering against my ribs, choosing for the first time to trust the men Joon-Seok had placed around me. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a side that had been chosen. The aftermath of the attempted kidnapping left a heavy, electric charge in the penthouse air. Marcus was gone, handed over to the authorities for his ties to Kossoff's illegal operations, a fate far more permanent than any restraining order. But the silence that followed wasn't the empty kind. It was the quiet before a final tectonic shift. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun dip below the skyline, painting the city in shades of bruised purple and gold. I still wore the midnight blue silk, though it was wrinkled now, and the diamond on my finger caught the dying light. When the doors hissed open, I didn't flinch. I knew the weight of his step. Joon-Seok walked to my side, his presence no longer a looming shadow, but a grounding force. He looked at the city, then at me, his gaze lingering on the steady set of my shoulders. "The threat is neutralized, Nyla," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum. "Marcus will never see the sun as a free man again, and Kossoff has retreated to lick his wounds. You are safe. Our year isn't up, but if you wish to leave now, the new identity and the funds are ready. You can be anyone, anywhere." I looked at him, really looked at him, stripping away the title of Mafia Boss and the label of protector. I saw the boy from the alleyway and the man who had given me a weapon when I was used to being the victim. "You told me once that you didn't believe in charity," I said softly. "But this contract, the fiancé ruse to appease your elders. I've been watching them, Joon-Seok. They don't care if you're married. They fear you regardless. You didn't need a distraction." Joon-Seok fell silent, his jaw tightening. He turned away from the window, the polished mask finally crumbling to reveal something raw and terrifyingly human. "I lied," he confessed, the words sounding like a surrender. "The syndicate didn't care about a fiancé. I made it up." I caught my breath. "Why?" "Because I knew if I offered you a place to stay out of the goodness of my heart, you would have run. You were a wounded bird, Nyla, looking for a cage or a sky, but never a home." He stepped into my space, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made the city lights seem dim. "I saw you in that garage, dusty, terrified, and more beautiful than anything I had ever built. I didn't want to just protect you. I wanted to keep you. I used the contract to bind you to me, until you could see that the only person you needed to stop running from was yourself." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched my cheek. "I loved you from the moment I found you on that cold concrete, not as a project, not as a puppet, as my equal." I didn't think about the garage, or Marcus, or the fear that had defined my life. I thought about the man who had lied to give me a choice. I reached up, covering his hand with mine, the diamond catching the light one last time before I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "I'm done running, Joon-Seok," I whispered against his lips, "and I'm done with contracts." I didn't stay because I was safe. I stayed because, for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I chose to be.